At 0021 feet hours on April 14, 1943, Flight Lieutenant Hugh Verity throttled back his Westland Lysander to 65 miles per hour and descended toward a pasture 30 miles southwest of Paris. The field was invisible in the darkness. No lights, no runway markers, nothing to indicate where he should land. Only 3 dim flashlights arranged in an inverted L pattern held by French resistance members standing in a meadow that measured 400 yards long and 150 yards wide. Verity had been given the field's coordinates by Special Operations Executive Headquarters at Tempsford, England. The coordinates indicated a location, nothing more. Whether the field was flat or sloped smooth or rough free of obstacles or filled with trees, Verity would discover only by landing on it. He carried 2 passengers in the rear cockpit, an SOE wireless operator codenamed Alain and a courier codenamed Madeleine. Both were French nationals recruited and trained in England, being inserted into occupied France to support resistance networks. They had no parachute training. The Lysander was their only means of insertion. At 100 feet altitude, Verity could see the field clearly in the moonlight. It was a pasture probably used for cattle, bordered by hedgerows on 3 sides and a woodline on the 4th. The surface appeared relatively smooth, though shadows indicated irregular ground. The approach was clear, no power lines or trees in the descent path. Verity reduced speed to 55 miles per hour, held the nose high, and touched down 50 yards past the first flashlight. The main wheels contacted grass, the Lysander settled onto its tail wheel, and the aircraft rolled approximately 80 yards before stopping completely. Total landing roll 80 yards, on a grass field, at night, with 2 passengers and 150 gallons of fuel. This was impossible by conventional aerodynamics. The Lysander stalled at 50 miles per hour clean, 45 miles per hour with flaps. Landing at 55 miles per hour with full flaps should have resulted in a ground roll of at least 200 yards on prepared runway, perhaps 300 yards on grass. But the Lysander's unique high-lift wing design created so much drag at low speed that the aircraft decelerated as if it had thrust reversers. Verity kept the engine running while his passengers climbed out. The resistance members rushed forward with 3 passengers being extracted from France, a British pilot who had been shot down and evaded capture, an SOE agent whose network had been compromised, and a French intelligence officer carrying documents for London. All 3 climbed into the rear cockpit, squeezing into a space designed for 2. The entire ground operation took 4 minutes. Verity added, "Power turned the Lysander into the wind," and began his takeoff roll. At 45 miles per hour, he pulled back on the control column. The Lysander lifted off after rolling 120 yards, climbed at 15 degrees, cleared the hedgerow at the end of the field by 30 feet, and disappeared into the darkness at 500 feet altitude. The resistance members collected their flashlights and disappeared into the woods. By 0225 hours, 8 minutes after Verity had first touched down, the field was empty and silent. To any German patrol passing by, nothing had happened. But 4 people had been delivered into occupied France, 3 had been extracted to safety, and critical intelligence documents were on their way to London. This was the mission the Lysander had been designed for, though not the mission anyone had envisioned when the aircraft was designed in 1936. The Westland Lysander was conceived as an Army cooperation aircraft, a military designation for a type that had emerged during World War I. Army cooperation aircraft worked directly with ground forces, conducting reconnaissance, artillery, spotting, liaison duties, and close support. They operated from forward airfields near the front lines, often from unprepared fields, and needed to land and take off in confined spaces. The British Air Ministry issued Specification A3934 in 1934, calling for an aircraft to replace the aging Hawker Hector in the Army cooperation role. The specification emphasized short field performance, excellent visibility for the crew, and ability to operate from rough, unprepared surfaces. Speed and maneuverability were secondary considerations. Westland Aircraft, based in Yeovil, Somerset, submitted a design by Arthur Davenport that took an unconventional approach. Instead of a conventional low-wing monoplane or biplane, Davenport proposed a high-wing monoplane with an extremely thick wing section. The wing used a Nacre 2412 airfoil with 19% thickness-to-chord ratio, far thicker than contemporary fighters, which used 12 to 14% airfoils. The thick wing generated enormous lift at low speeds but created substantial drag at high speeds. This was exactly what Army cooperation required: slow speed performance for observation and short field operations, not high-speed performance for air combat. The wing, Côte D, incorporated automatic leading-edge slats and trailing-edge slotted flaps. The slats deployed automatically when the angle of attack increased beyond a certain point, delaying stall and allowing lower flying speeds. The flaps could be lowered to 80 degrees, far more than the 40 to 50 degrees typical of contemporary aircraft. At full flap deflection, the wing generated so much drag that the aircraft descended steeply even at full power. The landing gear was extremely rugged, designed to absorb the shock of landing on unprepared fields. The main gear used long-stroke oleo-pneumatic shock absorbers that compressed up to 10 inches on landing. The gear track was wide, 12 feet, providing stability on uneven ground. The tailwheel was fully steerable, allowing tight turns on the ground. The fuselage was designed for visibility. The pilot sat high above the wing in a glazed cockpit, providing 270 degrees of visibility. The observer sat behind the pilot in a position slightly lower, but still with excellent visibility through side windows. Both crew positions had access to machine guns for self-defense. The engine was a Bristol Mercury 12 radial producing 890 horsepower, later upgraded to an 870 horsepower Mercury XX or 905 horsepower Mercury 30 on different variants. This engine drove a 3-blade variable pitch propeller that could be adjusted for takeoff, cruise, or landing performance. The first prototype Lysander flew on June 15, 1936 from Westland's factory airfield at Yeovil. Test pilot Harold Penrose reported that the aircraft was stable, easy to control, and had extraordinary low-speed handling. Stall speed with flaps was 45 miles per hour. Takeoff run at maximum weight was approximately 200 yards. Landing run was approximately 150 yards on grass. These performance figures were unprecedented. The Hawker Hector that the Lysander was replacing required 400 yards for takeoff and 300 yards for landing. The Lysander could operate from fields half the size. The Air Ministry ordered 144 Lysanders in September 1936 before the prototype had completed testing. Production began immediately. The first operational Lysanders were delivered to 16 Squadron RAF in June 1938. By September 1939, when World War II began, 16 squadrons were equipped with Lysanders. The aircraft served exactly as designed during the early months of the war. Lysander squadrons deployed to France with the British Expeditionary Force conducting reconnaissance and artillery spotting missions. They operated from forward airfields, often grass strips, barely 300 yards long, providing close support to ground forces. But the Lysander's slow speed made it vulnerable to modern fighters. Maximum speed was 212 miles per hour at 10,000 feet, far slower than the Messerschmitt Bf 109's 350 miles per hour. German fighters shot down Lysanders with ease during the Battle of France. Of the 174 Lysanders sent to France, 88 were destroyed or abandoned during the evacuation in May-June 1940. After Dunkirk, the RAF withdrew Lysanders from frontline service. The aircraft was clearly obsolete as a battlefield reconnaissance platform. but the characteristics that made it vulnerable in combat, slow speed, low altitude capability, short field performance, made it ideal for a different mission that was emerging. In July 1940, Winston Churchill authorized formation of the Special Operations Executive, a covert organization tasked with conducting espionage, sabotage, and supporting resistance movements in occupied Europe. SOE needed to insert agents into France and extract them when necessary. Parachute insertion was possible but risky and required extensive training. Many agents, particularly older individuals or those with specialized skills, could not parachute. The alternative was to land an aircraft, deliver, or collect agents and take off again. This required an aircraft that could operate from small, unprepared fields in darkness without ground support equipment. The Lysander was the only British aircraft capable of this mission. Squadron 161 Special Duties was formed at Tempsford, Bedfordshire in February 1942 specifically for clandestine operations. The squadron operated Lysanders and Armstrong Whitworth Whitleys, using the Lysanders for agent insertion and extraction, the Whitleys for parachute drops. The Lysanders were modified for the mission. The rear observer's position was converted to carry passengers. 2 seats were installed facing aft with minimal instrumentation but safety belts. A fixed ladder was attached to the port side of the fuselage, allowing passengers to board and disembark quickly without ground support equipment. Additional fuel tanks were installed in the observer's former position, increasing fuel capacity from 124 gallons to 274 gallons. This extended range from 600 miles to over 200 miles, allowing flights from England to central France and return without refueling. The exhaust was fitted with flame dampers to reduce visibility at night. The standard Army cooperation camouflage was replaced with matte black paint. All external protrusions that created drag the message hook. The rear gun mounting external spotting camera were removed to increase speed by approximately 10 miles per hour. Navigation equipment was upgraded. A dinghy was installed in case of ditching in the English Channel. An emergency radio was added. The aircraft was modified to be as self-sufficient as possible because no external support would be available in occupied territory. The pilots selected for 161 Squadron were experienced typically with 1,000 or more flying hours. They were trained in low-level navigation, night flying recognition of terrain features, and short-field operations. They practiced landings in fields as small as 400 yards, timing approaches to hit precise touchdown points, managing power and speed to minimize ground roll. The training emphasized judgment. Pilots had to assess fields in darkness, determining whether they were suitable for landing based on limited information. Too short, too rough, too many obstacles, and the mission would fail, possibly fatally. Pilots learned to evaluate fields based on dimensions, surface appearance obstacles, and approach paths, making decisions in seconds that could mean life or death. The first agent pickup mission was flown on September 19, 1941. Flight Lieutenant John Whippy Nesbitt Dufour flew a Lysander to a field near Châteauroux in central France, picked up a French agent being extracted after his network was compromised, and returned to England. The mission lasted 4 hours 40 minutes, covered 800 miles, and demonstrated that agent pickup was operationally feasible. Over the following 3 years, 161 Squadron flew 293 Lysander missions into occupied France. Of these, 243 were successful, meaning the aircraft landed, completed its mission, and returned safely. 50 missions were aborted due to weather, enemy activity, or inability to locate the reception committee. The success rate was 83%. The squadron transported 293 agents into France and extracted 500 agents from France. The numbers were not equal because most missions extracted more agents than they inserted. A typical mission might deliver 1 agent and extract 2 or 3, since extraction was more time-critical than insertion. The missions followed a standard pattern: SOE headquarters in London would coordinate with resistance networks in France to identify a suitable landing field. The field had to meet specific criteria: minimum 400 yards long, 100 yards wide, flat or gently sloping firm surface, clear approaches, no power lines or obstacles within 500 yards of the landing area. The resistance would provide field coordinates to London via wireless. The coordinates would be verified using aerial photography when possible. A code phrase would be broadcast over the BBC French service to alert the resistance that a flight was scheduled. The phrase might be something innocuous like, "The roses are blooming in Provence," broadcast as part of personal messages that followed the evening news. On the night of the operation, the Resistance Reception Committee would arrive at the field 2 hours before the scheduled arrival time. They would scout the area for German patrols, confirm the field was clear, and prepare the landing lights. The lights were typically flashlights or bicycle lamps arranged in an inverted L pattern pointing into the wind. The vertical line of the L had 3 lights spaced 50 yards apart. The horizontal base of the L had 1 light 100 yards from the vertical line. The pilot would approach from the direction indicated by the L pattern, landing alongside the vertical line of lights. After landing, the aircraft would taxi to the base of the L, where passengers would disembark and board. The Lysander would depart England at dusk, fly at low altitude across the English Channel to avoid radar detection, navigate across France using map reading and dead reckoning, arrive at the designated field at the scheduled time, land, complete the passenger exchange in 3 to 5 minutes, and return to England before dawn. Navigation was the most challenging aspect. Flying at 500 to 1,000 feet altitude in darkness over enemy territory, pilots had to identify checkpoints, maintain accurate heading and speed, calculate wind drift, and arrive at a specific field at a specific time, all while avoiding German night fighters and searchlight zones. Flight Lieutenant Hugh Verity became the most experienced Lysander pilot, completing 30 missions between February 1942 and August 1943. He developed techniques that became standard practice. He memorized routes, studying maps until he could visualize the terrain without reference. He identified distinctive checkpoints, rivers, forests, towns that were visible even in darkness. He calculated precise headings and speeds that would place him over each checkpoint at the planned time. Verity emphasized timing. Arriving early meant orbiting the field burning fuel and risking detection. Arriving late meant the reception committee might have abandoned the field fearing compromise. Arriving within 3 minutes of the scheduled time was considered good. Verity routinely arrived within 1 minute, sometimes landing at the exact scheduled time. The actual landing was the least challenging aspect for experienced pilots. The Lysander's handling characteristics made short field landings routine. The combination of automatic leading-edge slats, 80-degree flaps, and draggy airframe allowed approaches at 55 miles per hour with descent rates that would be impossible in conventional aircraft. Pilots would cross the hedgerow at the field boundary at 50 feet, reduce power to idle, hold the nose high, and settle onto the grass. The high drag caused rapid deceleration. By the time the aircraft had rolled 50 yards, speed had decreased from 55 miles per hour at touchdown to 20 miles per hour. Another 30 to 50 yards brought the aircraft to a complete stop. Takeoff was equally straightforward. Full power, hold the tail down until speed reached 40 miles per hour, pull back gently, and the Lysander would unstick at 45 miles per hour after rolling 100 to 150 yards. The aircraft climbed steeply at low speed, clearing obstacles that would require conventional aircraft to use much longer takeoff runs. Some missions required even shorter performance. In March 1943, Flight Lieutenant Peter von Fowler landed in a field only 300 yards long. He touched down within 20 yards of the first light, braked heavily, and stopped after 70 yards. After exchanging passengers, he took off using every yard of remaining field, clearing the hedgerow with less than 10 feet clearance. The mission succeeded, but von Fowler reported that 300 yards was the absolute minimum. Anything smaller would be suicidal. The Germans were aware that aircraft were landing in France. They discovered landing fields after the fact, finding wheel tracks and crushed grass. They interrogated captured agents who admitted being flown in by Lysander. They monitored BBC broadcasts and identified code phrases that activated reception committees. German response included increased patrols near suspected fields, searchlight zones along likely approach routes, and standing orders to night fighter units to watch for low-flying aircraft. Some resistance networks were infiltrated, leading to ambushes where German troops would wait at landing fields, allowing the Lysander to land, then opening fire or attempting to capture the aircraft. 161 Squadron lost 4 Lysanders to enemy action during pickup operations. 3 were shot down by ground fire after landing at compromised fields. 1 was intercepted by a night fighter while returning to England. Additionally, 3 Lysanders were lost to operational accidents, usually crashes in bad weather or navigation errors leading to fuel exhaustion. The loss rate of 7 aircraft in 293 missions was 2.4%, considered acceptable for high-risk operations. But each loss typically meant the pilot was killed or captured. Unlike bomber operations, where crew members could bail out, Lysander pilots flying at low altitude had no bailout option. If the aircraft was hit, the pilot either survived a crash landing or died with the aircraft. Despite the risks, pilots volunteered for the missions. The work had meaning that bombing missions lacked. Each mission saved lives or enabled resistance operations that disrupted German occupation. Pilots knew the agents they transported by name, sometimes spending hours together during pre-mission briefings. The missions were personal in ways that strategic bombing could never be. Flight Lieutenant Frank Griffiths described the satisfaction. "You landed in a field in the middle of nowhere, collected someone who had been working behind enemy lines for months, risking death every day, and brought them home safely. That meant something. You weren't dropping bombs on cities, you were saving individuals who were fighting the good fight on the ground." Every successful mission felt like a personal victory against the Germans. The agents transported by Lysander included some of SOE's most famous operatives. Odette Sansom, who worked with the resistance in southeastern France and was later captured and survived Ravensbrück concentration camp, was inserted by Lysander in November 1942. Peter Churchill, who organized resistance networks in the Rhone Valley, was inserted and extracted multiple times by Lysander between 1942 and 1943. Violette Szabo, who conducted sabotage operations in central France and was later captured and executed at Ravensbrück, was inserted by parachute, but her trainer and organizer, Philippe Lever, was inserted by Lysander. Francis Kammertz, who organized the largest resistance network in southeastern France, was inserted by Lysander in March 1943 and extracted by Lysander in September 1943 after being briefly captured and escaping. The Lysander missions continued through 1944 as preparations for D-Day intensified. SOE expanded resistance networks throughout France, requiring increased agent traffic. In the first 5 months of 1944, 161 Squadron flew more missions than in all of 1943. But the Lysander's limitations were becoming apparent. The aircraft's range was marginal for missions into eastern France or southern France. The limited passenger capacity meant that only 1 or 2 agents could be transported per mission. The vulnerability to night fighters was increasing as German radar and tactics improved. In mid-1944, 161 Squadron began replacing Lysanders with Lockheed Hudsons, which had longer range, higher speed, and could carry 6 to 8 passengers. The Hudson was less capable at short field operations, requiring fields of at least 600 yards, but its other advantages outweighed this limitation. The last Lysander agent pickup mission was flown in August 1944, shortly before the liberation of France. After D-Day, most agents could be extracted by ground transportation through Allied-controlled territory. The need for clandestine air operations decreased rapidly as the front lines moved eastward. By the end of 1944, 161 Squadron had transitioned entirely to Hudsons. The Lysanders were retired from special operations, reassigned to training units or target towing squadrons. The aircraft that had conducted some of the most dangerous and dramatic missions of the war ended its service doing mundane tasks. Total Lysander production was 1,652 aircraft, built by Westland between 1938 and 1942. Most served in the Army cooperation role in secondary theaters North Africa, Middle East, Burma, India. A few were used for air-sea rescue carrying inflatable dinghies that could be dropped to downed pilots. Some were converted to target tugs towing sleeves for anti-aircraft gunnery practice. After the war surplus, Lysanders were sold to civilian operators. Several were purchased by agricultural operators for crop dusting, a role the Lysanders' slow speed and high-lift wing made ideal for. The slow flying speed and excellent low-altitude handling made the aircraft perfect for flying slowly over fields while dispensing chemicals. Today, approximately 9 Lysanders survive in museums, and 2 are airworthy. The best-known flyable Lysander is owned by the Shuttleworth Collection in England, a Mickey Third built in 1941 that flew operational missions with a 161 Squadron. This aircraft is painted black and carries the markings it wore during special operations. It flies regularly at air shows, demonstrating the extraordinary short-field performance that made clandestine missions possible. The second airworthy Lysander is owned by the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum. This aircraft was built in Canada by National Steel Car in 1942 and served with the Royal Canadian Air Force as a training aircraft. It is painted in standard Army cooperation camouflage and represents the aircraft as it appeared in frontline service. Several other Lysanders survive in various states of restoration. The Royal Air Force Museum in London displays a Lysander MKI that served in France in 1940. The Imperial War Museum at Duxford displays a Lysander Mach 3A that flew target towing missions. The Canada Aviation and Space Museum in Ottawa displays a Canadian-built Lysander. The aircraft displayed at museums rarely convey the Lysander's most remarkable characteristic, its slow speed handling. Static displays show the distinctive high wing, the strut-braced landing gear, the extensive glazing. But they cannot demonstrate the automatic slats deploying as angle of attack increases the 80-degree flaps, creating massive drag, the gentle stall characteristics that allowed pilots to fly at 50 miles per hour with full control. These characteristics were what made the Lysander unique and what made special operations possible. The aircraft could land in fields that would be impossible for any other aircraft of its era. It could take off from fields that conventional wisdom said were too small for powered aircraft. It operated routinely from locations that should have required prepared runways but consisted of nothing more than pastures with cows. The crews who flew these missions never received the recognition given to fighter pilots or bomber crews. The operations were classified throughout the war and for decades afterward. Many missions were not declassified until the 1990s. The pilots could not discuss their work, could not wear decorations they earned, could not acknowledge the agents they transported. Hugh Verity, the most decorated Lysander pilot with a Distinguished Service Order and Distinguished Flying Cross, wrote after the war, "We were flying taxi drivers, nothing more. The heroes were the agents who parachuted into France or landed in our aircraft, who lived among the enemy for months, who organized resistance networks, knowing they could be arrested and shot at any moment. We just flew them in and out. They did the dangerous work." But flying them in and out required flying 800 miles across enemy territory at night, navigating by map reading and dead reckoning, landing on an unmarked field in darkness, guided only by 3 flashlights, spending 4 minutes on the ground in occupied France, while German patrols might arrive at any moment, then flying home before dawn. The missions were extraordinary by any measure. The Lysander's contribution to victory was impossible to quantify. The 293 agents inserted and 500 agents extracted by 161 Squadron represented a tiny fraction of Allied forces. But those agents organized resistance networks that disrupted German communications, sabotaged infrastructure, gathered intelligence, and supported Allied ground forces after D-Day. Their impact far exceeded their numbers. Without Lysanders, many agents could not have been inserted or extracted. Parachute insertion was possible, but required training that many agents could not complete. Extraction by parachute was impossible. Extraction by boat from French coast was possible, but limited by geography. Extraction by land through Spain was possible, but slow and uncertain. The Lysander provided a reliable means of moving people into and out of occupied France. The aircraft's unique capabilities made missions possible that would have been impossible with any other aircraft. The combination of short field performance, long range, and relatively benign handling characteristics created an operational capability that existed nowhere else. Westland Lysander wingspan 50 feet length, 30 feet 6 inches empty weight, 365 pounds maximum speed, 212 miles per hour. Stall speed 45 miles per hour with flaps takeoff roll, 120 yards landing roll, 80 yards. The Army cooperation aircraft that found its true calling, landing in French pastures at midnight, operating from fields that conventional aircraft would consider impossible, bringing people into occupied territory and taking people out. 293 successful missions into France, 293 agents delivered, 500 agents extracted, 7 aircraft lost to all causes. The plane that made its own runway wherever it landed, that turned pastures into operational airfields for 4 minutes, that demonstrated extraordinary capabilities, could be found in aircraft that seemed obsolete by contemporary standards. The high-wing monoplane with automatic slats and 80-degree flaps that could land in 80 yards and take off in 120 yards. The aircraft that flew lower, slower, and into smaller fields than any other operational aircraft of World War II. The special duties Lysander that connected England with occupied France through courage, navigation skill, and aerodynamics that allowed the impossible to become routine. The taxi service that ran through the darkness, landing in fields lit by 3 flashlights, delivering freedom fighters and extracting the hunted one small mission at a time.